Have you ever stopped to think whether your pursuit of discipline is actually helping you or just making you more frustrated and exhausted? We live in an era where productivity has almost become a religion. If you're not waking up at 5 a.m., reading 3 books a month, meditating, and following the flawless routine of top entrepreneurs, it feels like you're falling behind. But what if I told you that this obsession with discipline might actually be pulling you away from what truly matters? That maybe the problem isn't a lack of effort, but rather an excess of it. Maybe you felt this firsthand. You decide to change your life for good, creating a perfect routine packed with non-negotiable habits. On day 1, you stick to the plan. On day 2, still motivated, you push through any laziness. But over time, your energy starts to drop. You wake up more tired, your performance declines, yet the pressure to keep up the pace doesn't let up. After all, you've read that discipline is everything. So, even exhausted, you keep pushing forward. Tell me, have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt like, instead of being in control, it was your routine that was controlling you? The problem is that this mindset turns discipline into a mental prison. The goal was to improve your life, but now, every deviation from the plan feels like failure. Guilt kicks in when you don't meet your own expectations. Even worse, instead of progress, all you feel is exhaustion and the sense that you're never doing enough. Imagine someone who decides to wake up at 5 a.m. every day to work out, read, and focus on personal projects. At first, everything flows well, but as the days pass, fatigue builds up. One day, they oversleep, and instead of resting and adjusting, they feel like they've thrown all their effort away. The next day, to compensate, they push themselves even harder, until, completely drained, they give up altogether. So here's the real question: is discipline serving your well-being, or are you serving it? Today, we're going to explore the dark side of self-discipline and learn how to avoid this trap. Because yes, discipline is important. But when misapplied, it can become the biggest enemy of your productivity and your mental peace. And the worst part? Most of the time, you don't even realize you've fallen into this trap until you're already deeply stuck in it. But don't worry, there's still time to break free from this cycle, and I'm going to show you how. If there's one thing extreme productivity culture has successfully sold, it's the idea that absolute discipline is the key to success. Just watch any motivational video and you'll see the same narrative repeated: wake up at 5 a.m., follow a flawless morning routine, work like a machine, and in the end, you'll be successful. Sounds simple, right? But reality is quite different. The problem with this perspective is that it completely ignores the human factor. We're not machines programmed to operate at the same pace all the time. Not everyone thrives in the early morning, and not everyone can stick to an extremely rigid routine without facing emotional and physical consequences. Yet, we're constantly bombarded with stories of top entrepreneurs and elite athletes who follow inflexible habits and supposedly reach the top because of them. Now, think about it. How many of these stories take individual differences into account? How many talk about moments of exhaustion, about the days when these same entrepreneurs failed and had to adjust their routines? Few, if any. That's because the idea of a one-size-fits-all success formula is far more marketable than admitting that the process is complex and varies from person to person. When discipline, meant to be a tool for improvement, becomes an end in itself, it stops being an ally and turns into a trap. An unattainable standard that, instead of fostering progress, only generates frustration and guilt. The problem is that almost no one talks about the side effects of this obsession. And the worst part? Most of the time, we only realize that our routine is draining us rather than driving us forward when we're already on the verge of burnout. Now, let's focus on what really matters, helping you improve in a way that actually works. I've got valuable insights throughout this video, and the last one might completely change your perspective. So, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on content that will help you build a lighter and more efficient routine. But then, how do you differentiate healthy discipline from harmful obsession? The first step is understanding that discipline shouldn't be rigid or blind. And the second step is recognizing the warning signs that you might already be sabotaging yourself without even realizing it. Discipline should be a tool that helps you achieve your goals. But at some point, it can stop being a means to an end and become an invisible burden. The problem is, this doesn't happen overnight, it's a gradual, silent process, and by the time you notice, you're already trapped. But how do you know when discipline has crossed the line from something positive to something harmful? Some signs are clear. First, feeling guilty for resting. If you believe that any break is a waste of time, that an unproductive day means total regression, this could indicate that your routine is too rigid. Rest isn't a luxury, it's a biological necessity. No human being can maintain peak performance without allowing the body and mind time to recover. Another classic sign is extreme rigidity in your routine. If you have a list of non-negotiable habits and feel like a failure when you miss one, that's a red flag. Healthy discipline is adaptable. Repeat that to yourself. Healthy discipline is adaptable. Consistency is important, but you need to understand that some days will be different from others, and that's okay. If your routine doesn't allow for adjustments, it's not serving you, you're serving it. Then there's mental and physical fatigue. When discipline turns into obsession, it drains your body and mind in ways that are almost imperceptible. You might think you're doing fine, but suddenly, you struggle to concentrate, your energy levels drop, and tasks start taking longer than usual. Instead of pushing you forward, your routine starts pulling you down. This happens because the human brain isn't built to operate in productivity mode all the time. When you push yourself too hard without adequate breaks, your body responds by increasing cortisol levels, the stress hormone. This activates survival mode, making you feel anxious, overwhelmed, and even emotionally unstable. And the irony? This state of burnout destroys your ability to be productive because your brain simply can't function at peak performance anymore. And here's the question that changes everything: is the discipline you work so hard to maintain actually helping you grow, or is it slowly destroying you? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many perfect habits you have if your mind and body are on the verge of collapse. Real discipline needs to be sustainable. And in this context, sustainability means building a routine that strengthens you in the long run without leading you to burnout. It's about finding a balanced rhythm where progress doesn't come at the cost of your physical and mental health, but rather in a consistent and lasting way. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the next chapter: how to differentiate rigid discipline from smart, flexible discipline that actually works in the long run. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is thinking that discipline and rigidity are the same thing. But the truth is, they're very different concepts. While healthy discipline acts as a compass that guides you toward your goals, rigidity turns that compass into a chain, preventing you from adapting when necessary. The biggest mistake people make when clinging to rigid discipline is believing that any deviation means failure. Have you ever caught yourself thinking something like, "If I don't follow my routine perfectly, then I've ruined everything"? This mindset is extremely dangerous because it ignores one of the biggest truths about personal growth: progress is not linear. Think about someone who decides to follow an extremely disciplined routine, waking up at 5 a.m., working out, reading a book per week, and following a strict diet. At first, they're motivated and follow everything perfectly. But one day, for some reason, they go to bed late and can't wake up at their usual time. Frustration kicks in, guilt sets in, and instead of simply adjusting their routine for the day, they have a destructive thought: "Since I failed today, I've lost my momentum and nothing makes sense anymore." This is the difference between smart discipline and self-destructive rigidity. Smart discipline understands that setbacks happen and allows for adjustments without guilt. Meanwhile, rigidity feeds on the idea that everything must be followed to the letter, or else, it's worthless. And guess which one actually brings real, long-term results? The most productive people aren't the ones who follow a rigid, inflexible routine, but rather those who know when to adjust, when to rest, and when to push forward. No elite athlete trains at their maximum limit every single day. No successful entrepreneur ignores their own well-being just to stick to a fixed routine. The kind of discipline that actually works is flexible, adaptable, and sustainable. And there's another important point: if your routine doesn't allow for rest, then it's not sustainable. Rest is not procrastination. On the contrary, it's a fundamental part of the process. Trying to maintain an uninterrupted pace of work and productivity is like trying to drive a car without ever stopping to refuel. At some point, the engine will break down. And the most ironic part? People who manage to balance discipline and flexibility tend to stay productive for much longer than those who force themselves into rigid routines. That's because they avoid mental and physical fatigue, don't let guilt drain their energy, and can maintain consistency without suffering. So the question you need to ask yourself is the discipline you have today actually sustainable, or are you just forcing yourself to follow rules that don't even make sense for your life? And now that we understand this crucial difference, let's move on to the most important part: how to find this balance in practice and turn discipline into something that actually works for you. How to turn self-discipline into an ally, not a prison. Now that we've seen the dangers of rigid discipline, the big question arises: how can you turn self-discipline into something that actually works without feeling like a trap? The answer lies in finding the balance between consistency and flexibility. The first step is self-awareness. Each person has a different rhythm and energy levels that fluctuate throughout the day. Instead of trying to copy the routine of someone who wakes up at 5 a.m. and reads for 3 hours before breakfast, ask yourself, when do I function best? Some people are more productive in the morning, others at night. Aligning your discipline with your natural rhythm is far more effective than trying to fit into a rigid model. The second step is setting flexible, not fixed, goals. Instead of rigid rules like, I must read 50 pages a day, think in a more adaptable format: I'll read whenever I can, but I won't punish myself if I read less or nothing at all on some days. Consistency matters, but flexibility prevents burnout. Another essential point is understanding the importance of rest. Many people see rest as a sign of weakness or laziness, but in reality, it's a key part of smart discipline. If you never give your body and mind a break, your productivity will eventually crash. Resting is part of the growth process. Additionally, healthy discipline means adjusting your routine when necessary. If something that once made sense starts to feel like a burden, maybe it's time to rethink it. Success doesn't come from rigid habits, but rather from the ability to adapt. Finally, the best way to find balance between discipline and freedom is to accept that perfection doesn't exist. You don't need to follow everything 100% of the time to be productive. What truly makes a difference is long-term consistency, even if some days are less productive than others. The final reflection: is your discipline serving you, or are you serving it? And with that, we reach the last reflection: if your discipline isn't making you feel good, is it really discipline, or just a pattern you're following without questioning? If there's one thing we need to understand about discipline, it's that it should be an ally, not an enemy. At the end of the day, there's no point in following a perfect routine on paper if, in practice, it just leaves you feeling exhausted, frustrated, and like you're never doing enough. True discipline isn't about forcing yourself into rigid rules, it's about building habits that actually make sense for you. A functional routine needs adjustments, breaks, and, above all, a focus on your well-being. If your discipline is draining your energy and causing more stress than actual results, then maybe it's time to rethink your approach. And that brings us to the most important question of this video: are you using discipline to grow, or are you a prisoner to it? Because if it's the second option, then it's time to make some changes. Productivity doesn't come from perfect routines, it comes from sustainable habits. And that means learning to listen to your body, understanding your own limits, and building a routine that works for you, not to fit an imposed standard from others. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you were forcing yourself into a routine that didn't make sense? Have you ever fallen into the trap of thinking that discipline has to be painful? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your experience. And if this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear this. Because sometimes, all we need is a reminder that real discipline isn't about following rules, it's about adapting them to our reality.